I never thought my family would be at the center of something folks might one day call a miracle. It all started back on a regular morning in August the 11th, back in 2015, in our little town of Willow Creek, Kansas. We're the kind of place that's easy to miss. Just about 4,000 people, surrounded by a whole lot of wheat fields and empty highway. Life here runs on a simple rhythm: hard work, minding your own business, and making do with what you have. But let me tell you, behind our little two-bedroom house on Maple Street, we were barely hanging on. My wife, Sarah, used to be an accountant with a good, steady job. Now I'd see her standing in our kitchen, opening up cabinets and finding nothing but dust. As for me, I'm a carpenter. Or I was. It'd been close to a year since I'd seen a real paycheck. My workshop, my pride and joy, burned right to the ground the previous winter. The insurance company dragged their feet, asked a million questions, and finally just said no. We tried to fight it, but you can't hire a lawyer when you can't afford groceries. Our kids, Emily, who's 12, Jacob, 9, and our little Lily, just 4 years old, they were too young to understand the bills, but they sure felt the hunger in their bellies. Emily started making up stories at school, saying she just really liked wearing the same hoodie every single day, even when the sleeves didn't reach her wrists anymore. Jacob learned to stop complaining, though at night he'd sometimes whisper that his stomach hurt. And Lily, with that honest way little kids have, would just keep asking when breakfast was, even when there was nothing left in the house to cook. For 3 straight days, we hadn't had a real meal. A can of beans, the end of a loaf of bread, some broth we watered down to pretend it was soup. That was it. That's all we had. People around town started to notice little things. The lady at the grocery store remembered Sarah always buying snacks for the kids. Now she was only getting the cheapest bag of flour or some rice, if she bought anything at all. Me, I used to walk tall, always with a little sawdust on my shirt. Now I was just walking, going door to door, asking at farms and construction sites if they needed an extra pair of hands. I got turned down every time, and then came the moment that changed everything. On that August afternoon, Sarah took all 3 kids by the hand and walked them down to St. Joseph's Church on Main Street. She'd always been so proud, determined to handle our problems on our own. But seeing the hunger in our children's eyes finally broke her. That motherly instinct to protect her family just overruled everything else. Folks who saw her that day said they'd never forget it. A woman pale from worry, her hair pulled back quick, walking with 3 quiet kids shuffling beside her. Emily was carrying Lily's doll. Jacob held onto Sarah's hand like he was afraid to let go. They weren't crying or making a sound, but their silence spoke louder than any fuss. It was the silence of being just plain worn out. When she got to the priest's door and rang the bell, Father Michael was just finishing up his afternoon rest. He told me later that the second he opened that door, he felt something change in the air. He took one look at my kids, sunken cheeks, and Sarah's shaking hands, and knew this wasn't any ordinary visit. "Father," she said, and her voice was cracking, "we haven't eaten in 3 days. My children are hungry. I don't know where else to go." Those quiet words, said in a whisper, started a chain of events that nobody in Willow Creek could have ever seen coming. A family like ours, right at our lowest point, a mother who had to let go of her pride, and a whole town about to see something they'd one day say was a miracle. And if you're listening to this right now, I want you to know what happened to us wasn't just about putting food on the table. It was about something bigger, a kind of help that shows up in the quiet of despair, in ways that don't make a lick of sense, but you can't deny. Stick with me to the end of this, because what happened next, inside our small American house with its peeling paint and creaky floors, didn't just change my family's future. It changed what a whole town believed was possible. Before the hard times hit, we Millers were just like any other family in a small town. We lived in that modest 2-bedroom place on Maple Street. with its faded blue siding and a backyard just big enough for a swing set, and the tomato plants Sarah tried to grow every summer. For the longest time, we had a good, quiet life. I'd built up a real name for myself as a carpenter. For 15 years, I specialized in handcrafted cabinets and fixing up antiques. My workshop was in an old barn out back, and it became a real hub for folks all around. People said I had the old-school touch, a kind of quality you couldn't find at a big store. On weekends, you could hear the buzz of my saw and the sound of my hammer, me teaching my apprentices how to shape a good piece of oak or walnut. Sarah, with her accounting degree, handled all the money stuff. She took care of the invoices, the taxes, made sure every client's check got into the bank. More than that, she raised our 3 kids with a steady, calm love. Emily, the oldest, has her mum's thoughtful eyes. Jacob has my curiosity, always tinkering with wood scraps in the shop. Little Lily was the heart of our whole family, the toddler who filled the house with her giggles. For a long time, life felt solid, secure. But that can change in a heartbeat. It started with one phone call in late 2024. A property developer from Wichita, who owed my workshop over $40,000 for a big custom kitchen job, declared bankruptcy. Just like that, months of our hard work vanished into thin air. We tightened our belts, figured we'd bounce back. But then January brought real disaster. On a freezing cold night, a spark in the workshop's wiring turned into a full-blown fire. By the time the fire department got there, the whole barn was just an inferno. Every tool I had, my saws, sanders, planers, was nothing but twisted metal. All the wood I'd saved up over the years, beautiful maple and cherry, gone to ash. I stood there in the snow with my kids holding onto Sarah's coat, watching my entire livelihood disappear. The insurance adjusters came, took their pictures, filed their reports. Weeks went by, then months. The letters they sent were full of legal jargon and denials, unverified cause, potential negligence. The claim got delayed, then they argued about it, and then it was like it never even existed. Without my tools, I couldn't take on new jobs. By March, I was officially out of work. Sarah tried to step up. She polished her resume and sent it to accounting firms in Wichita, Topeka, even Kansas City. But she was 37 years old, with a 7-year gap in her work history from raising our kids. Rejections just filled up her email inbox. "We've chosen another candidate. Thank you for your application." Every one of those messages felt like another door slamming right in our faces. Our savings disappeared fast. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries. They ate through the little cushion we'd managed to build up. By June, unopened bills were just piled up on the kitchen counter. The electric company sent warnings. The gas bill doubled. We sold our used minivan, then Sarah's wedding ring, then the antique furniture I'd restored myself years ago. Neighbors started to notice something was wrong. The kids didn't ride their bikes to the park anymore. Sarah would walk to the grocery store with exact change clutched in her hand. I was knocking on doors, offering to fix fences or mow lawns for $20. A proud craftsman reduced to begging for odd jobs that wouldn't even cover a loaf of bread. Emily started lying to her classmates, telling them her worn-out shoes were her favorite pair. Jacob, who used to ask a million questions, got quiet at the dinner table. Lily, too little to understand money, just cried for food we didn't have to give her. By July, the line between getting by and total collapse got real blurry. Sarah started cleaning houses for cash under the table, scrubbing floors for money that barely bought a box of cereal. I tried my luck at the nearby farms, offering to help with the early harvest, but the farmers just shook their heads. "Sorry, not hiring. Maybe next season." At night, me and Sarah would just sit at the kitchen table in silence, staring at those stacks of overdue bills. "I feel like we're sinking," she whispered one night, tears running down her face. "And no one even sees us." I held her hand. But the calluses that used to mean I was strong were now just trembling from feeling so defeated. Pride is a powerful thing. It kept us from asking for help for way too long. We still went to church every Sunday at St. Joseph's, dressed nice, smiling politely. Almost nobody knew that we had often skipped breakfast just so the kids could have a little something. Father Michael, our parish priest, noticed my hollow cheeks and Sarah's worn-out clothes, but whenever he tried to ask, we'd just brush him off with a polite smile. By the first week of August, the cupboards were practically empty. The mortgage company was threatening to take our house. Our phone got cut off. On August 10th, Sarah opened every cabinet, desperate to find anything for dinner. All she found was a half-empty jar of peanut butter, a little bit of flour, and a box of herbal tea. That night, she mashed the peanut butter with some stale bread crusts, called it a special recipe, and served it up like it was a feast. The kids ate quietly, but Emily noticed her mum's plate was empty. "Mum, you're not eating," she said. Sarah gave her a weak smile. "I'm just not hungry." The truth was, she was starving, saving her share for me, knowing I'd come home late again, tired and beat. That's a moment you don't ever forget as a parent. Hearing your child ask why there is no food in the fridge, why their stomach hurts, if you're all going to die from being hungry. Sarah tucked the kids into bed that night with a prayer whispered into the darkness. She didn't know if God was even listening anymore. She didn't know if heaven even paid attention to families like ours. But as she lay awake, staring at a crack in the ceiling, she made up her mind about one thing. The next morning, she was going to do what her pride had fought against for so long. She was going to take our children by the hand, walk them to the church, and ask for help. That choice, humble and desperate and born from a mother's love, was the first step that opened our door to the extraordinary. By that second week of August, our household had crossed a line you never want to cross, the line between having a hard time and straight-up starving. Hunger wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was the rhythm of our whole day, a shadow in every single room. On Monday morning, Sarah opened the fridge, hoping against hope. The light came on, but the shelves were practically bare. Just a jar of mustard, half a stick of butter, and a carton of eggs that was way past its expiration date. She checked the cupboards next, a little dust at the bottom of the flour bag, a box of tea bags, undented can of green beans that had been forgotten in the back. She lined it all up on the counter like a soldier taking inventory before a battle. Emily, standing quiet in the doorway, whispered, "Mom, is that all we have?" Sarah forced a smile. "It's enough for today," she said, but the pit in her own stomach told a different story. That night, she boiled those green beans with a little flour to make a watery stew. She ladled out bowls for the kids and set them down like it was some old family recipe. "Try this," she said, putting on a bright voice. "It's something special." Emily ate in silence, but her eyes didn't miss the empty plate in front of her mom. "Mom, you didn't take any," she said softly. Sarah just waved it off. "I'm not hungry." But she was. Her body ached for food, and she was still saving her part for me, knowing I'd come home late with nothing but another apology. Tuesday was even worse. Breakfast was hot tea with one spoonful of sugar, the last we had. For lunch, Sarah found a hardened crust of a loaf of bread buried in the freezer. She scraped the very last of the peanut butter from the jar, spread it thin, and cut the pieces into 3. Jacob ate his fast, then clutched his stomach. "It hurts today," he murmured, trying not to cry. Lily, too young to hide what she needed, just sobbed. She asked over and over for cereal, for yogurt, for anything that would fill her up. I came home late again, my face just lined with pure exhaustion. "No work," I admitted, collapsing into a chair at the kitchen table. "They said maybe next week, maybe." Sarah wanted to scream. Next week felt a million years away. Next week our kids might not even have the strength to play. Instead, she just put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll make it somehow," she whispered, even though neither of us knew how anymore. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah sat on the kitchen floor and cried quiet into her hands. Pride had kept her from telling anyone the truth. She'd smile and wave at the neighbors. At church, she stood tall, pretending everything was just fine. But inside, she was completely falling apart. "God," she whispered into the silence, "if you can see us, if you can hear me, please help my children." Wednesday morning dawned heavy and hot. The kids woke up sluggish, their eyes dull, their voices faint. Sarah gave them cups of tea, calling it a special breakfast, even though the sugar was all gone. Emily tried to drink hers slow, pretending to like it, while Jacob pushed his cup away, whispering, "It's not food." Then, around 10 o'clock, Jacob swayed where he stood, his knees buckled and he fell. Pure panic shot through Sarah's chest as she caught him, shaking. "I'm fine," he insisted, weak, "just dizzy." But the truth was plain as day. 3 days without real food had pushed their small bodies right past their limit. Emily, old enough to ask the questions we were afraid of, finally broke the silence. "Mom, why don't we have food anymore? What's going to happen to us? Are we going to die?" Sarah froze, her throat closing up around words she couldn't say. She just pulled our daughter close and whispered, "I won't let that happen, I promise." But we both knew promises don't fill empty stomachs. By noon, Sarah knew she couldn't hide behind her pride any longer. She washed the kids' faces, tied Lily's hair into a little ponytail, and told them they were going for a walk. Inside, her heart was breaking. She'd never asked anyone for help in her entire life. We'd always been the givers, the ones people could depend on. But now our children's hollow eyes left her with no other choice. When she stepped out the door, neighbors saw her leading the 3 kids down Maple Street. Most thought nothing of it, just a mom out for a walk on a summer afternoon. Nobody knew that inside her purse was exactly $3.25 in change, all the money we had left in the whole house. Nobody knew she was heading straight for St. Joseph's Rectory, ready to say the words that would shatter her pride forever. "My children haven't eaten in 3 days." Sarah Miller had hit her breaking point. What she couldn't possibly know was that this act of humility, the simple decision to knock on a church door, wouldn't end in humiliation. It would start a chain of events that defied every logical explanation anyone could come up with. It was our darkest hour. And yet, like they say, the darkest hour is always just before the dawn. When Sarah got to the old brick rectory of St. Joseph's, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd walked the 2 blocks from Maple Street, with our 3 kids trailing quiet beside her, every step heavy with shame and fear. Emily was clutching Lily's doll. Jacob was dragging his shoes on the sidewalk, and Sarah held their small hands like they were her last bit of courage. The rectory isn't some big fancy place, just a simple 2-story house next to the church, its white shutters peeling from years of Kansas sun. But to Sarah, standing at that gate, it felt like a huge wall she was about to break through. She swallowed hard and rang the bell. Inside, Father Michael was just finishing his afternoon nap. At 62 years old, the priest had been serving Willow Creek for over 20 years. His hair had gone silver, his face lined from a lifetime of listening more than talking. He was known for his gentle sermons, his habit of visiting folks who were shut in, and his uncanny way of noticing things other people missed. When the doorbell rang, he got up, slipped on his glasses, and shuffled to the door. The moment he opened it, he told me later, he felt it. A weight in the air, a plea that didn't need words. There stood Sarah, pale, her lips pressed tight, our 3 kids clinging to her. He didn't need her to say a thing. Their hollow faces told him the whole story. "Father," she began, and her voice broke, "we haven't eaten in 3 days. My children are hungry. I don't know where else to go." Those words just hung there in the air, like a confession that shattered the quiet of the rectory. Father Michael stepped aside immediately. "Come in, my dear. Bring the children." He led them into his modest living room, with its worn-out furniture and a crucifix on the wall. The kids sat on the couch, wide-eyed and silent. The priest disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a tray, a pitcher of milk, a plate of crackers, and a jar of peanut butter. "Here, little ones, eat first." Emily hesitated, glancing at her mom, but Father Michael urged her with a nod. Within minutes, the kids were devouring that food with a hunger that was painful to watch. Jacob's small hands shook as he scooped peanut butter onto crackers. Lily clutched her cup of milk like it was a treasure. Even Emily, who tried to act so grown-up, couldn't hide her relief. Sarah sat quiet, tears streaming down her face. Watching her children eat, she felt both grateful and so ashamed, like she'd failed them. Father Michael noticed and gently put a hand on her shoulder. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's love." Bit by bit, Sarah told him everything. The unpaid invoices, the fire that wiped out the workshop, the insurance company's refusal, my endless search for work. She talked about the bills piling up on the counter, selling her wedding ring, the empty cupboards. Her voice cracked when she admitted, "I thought I could protect them from this, but I can't anymore." Father Michael listened without interrupting, his eyes kind but serious. He'd heard a lot of confessions in his life, but this was different. This wasn't about sin. This was about survival. When Sarah finished, he leaned forward. "Sarah, you and your children are not alone. The parish has a small emergency fund. It's meant exactly for situations like this." He walked to a small wooden cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. Inside was $200 in cash, money collected from parishioners for folks in need. He pressed it into Sarah's hands. She shook her head, completely overwhelmed. "Father, I can't." "Yes, you can," he interrupted, gentle but firm. "This isn't charity in the way of pity. This is community. Even Jesus accepted food from his friends. Take it and use it to feed your children tonight." Her fingers closed around that envelope. It felt heavier than money. It felt like a lifeline. But Father Michael knew $200 wouldn't fix everything. "I will call around," he said firmly. "There may be someone who needs a carpenter, and if not, we will find other ways. What matters now is that your family has food." Sarah could hardly speak. "How do I thank you?" "By keeping faith," the priest replied. "Simple as that. By remembering that even in the darkest times God sees you. He does not forget his children." When Sarah left the rectory that afternoon, our 3 kids walked beside her, their bellies finally full, their faces brighter. In her hands, she held that envelope, though she still couldn't quite believe it. She'd walked through that door, trembling with shame. She walked out carrying something else, the first little flicker of hope. Yet none of us knew that this simple act of courage, one mom knocking on a priest's door, was only the very beginning. What was waiting for us in the hours ahead would make even this moment of relief seem small. Late that afternoon, Sarah walked into the Walmart on the edge of Willow Creek with our 3 kids at her side. She was gripping that envelope Father Michael had given her, like it was made of solid gold. $200, more money than we'd seen in weeks, felt like both a fortune and a fragile rope keeping us from falling any further into despair. The sliding glass doors whooshed open, and a wave of cool air hit them. For Emily, Jacob, and little Lily, stepping into that store was like stepping into another world. The bright lights, the neat shelves, the endless rows of food. It was totally overwhelming. They hadn't been in a grocery store for weeks, and now their wide eyes darted from aisle to aisle like they were in a dream. Sarah had made a list carefully at home: bread, milk, rice, pasta, canned goods, some fresh fruit and vegetables. Nothing extra, no fancy stuff, just enough to stretch for a week. She held on to that list like a compass, determined not to wander. Still, the kids couldn't help themselves. "Mom, can we get yogurt?" Jacob whispered, hopeful. Emily pointed to the apples in the produce section. "These look so good." And Lily, tugging at Sarah's sleeve, whispered with all the urgency a 4-year-old can muster, "Cookies, Mama, please, cookies." Sarah's heart just ached. For weeks, she'd had to tell them no to every little joy. She nodded once. "We'll see, but only if we can afford it." They moved aisle by aisle, filling the cart with the basics. A gallon of milk, a bag of rice, some pasta, peanut butter, frozen vegetables. Sarah compared prices, choosing the store brands, checking the total in her head with every single item. By the time they got to the checkout line, the cart was modest but full. Bread, eggs, cereal, some chicken, apples, a few small treats. At the register, Sarah's chest felt tight. She'd been adding the numbers in her mind. The total was going to be close to $180, maybe a little more. That would leave just a few dollars for any kind of emergency. She pulled the bills from the envelope and smoothed them out nervously on the counter. The cashier, a kind, middle-aged woman named Linda, who'd seen our family before, started scanning the items. "How are you doing today?" she asked, smiling at the kids. "We're okay," Sarah said softly, though her eyes showed all the tension she was feeling. The scanner beeped, item after item. Sarah's pulse picked up as the total climbed. 47.62, 83.19, 128.45. She almost couldn't breathe when it passed 150. Finally, the screen flashed the final number, 187.45, nearly the whole envelope. She let out a shaky breath, ready to hand over the money. But then something happened. The cashier frowned, tapping the screen. "That's strange," she muttered. "The register is now showing $72.45. Sarah blinked. "Excuse me." Linda shook her head. "Must be a glitch. Let me scan it all again." She cleared the screen and rescanned every single item carefully, her hands moving slower this time. Again, the total popped up, $72.45. "I don't understand," Linda whispered. "This machine has worked perfectly for years." She tried it a third time, real deliberate. The result was the same. Finally, Linda looked at Sarah with wide eyes. "Well, I can't charge you more than what the register says. It's $72.45 today." Sarah's hands trembled as she handed over the cash. She could hardly breathe. She walked away with our kids and her receipt, the cart full of groceries, and over $120 still in that envelope. But the strange part wasn't over. When she started unloading the bags into the car, Sarah noticed items she was absolutely certain she hadn't picked out. A bottle of olive oil, a package of shredded cheese, a bar of chocolate, even jars of baby food that Lily hadn't had in months. Her first thought was panic. Had one of the kids slipped things into the cart? "Emily, Jacob, did you put these in?" They shook their heads. Lily just stared wide-eyed, clutching her doll. Sarah emptied every single bag. The truth was undeniable. There were at least $50 worth of extra food there, and she had no memory of putting any of it in the cart. She sat down hard on the curb outside the store, the Kansas sun starting to set behind her. Our kids gathered around, tugging at the grocery bags, delighted by the sudden abundance. For Sarah, the whole world seemed to tilt. Was this just chance, a computer error, or was it something else? That night, for the first time in 3 days, our family sat down to a real dinner. Sarah cooked pasta with cheese, served a fresh salad, poured milk into glasses. Jacob devoured his plate. Emily ate in silence, tears in her eyes. Little Lily, sticky with yogurt and cookie crumbs, laughed for the first time in weeks. I came home late, my face as weary as ever. But when I stepped into the kitchen and saw the table covered with food, I just stopped in my tracks. Where did all this come from? Sarah explained about the envelope, the store, the glitch, the extra food. I stared at her in pure disbelief. "You're saying you paid $72 for all this?" I asked it 3 times, like saying it again might make it less impossible. Sarah nodded, her eyes welling up. I don't know how to explain it. For that evening, explanations didn't matter one bit. What mattered was the sound of forks on plates, the giggles of our kids, and the quiet sobs of two parents who had carried something unbearable and, for the first time in months, felt the weight lift, if only for a little while. But deep in Sarah's chest, one thought pulsed like a heartbeat. This isn't just luck. Something greater is at work here. And she was right. The strange grace of that supermarket was only the first whisper of a miracle that had only just begun. That Wednesday night, our home was alive with sounds it hadn't known in months. Laughter, clinking glasses, the chatter of kids too busy eating to complain. The kitchen table, usually bare, was now covered with plates of pasta, salad, and warm bread. For the first time in days, we all ate until we were full. When dinner was over, I gave Jacob a piggyback ride down the hall. Emily washed dishes next to her mom, and little Lily sang to her doll. The house, so long filled with a heavy silence, seemed to breathe again. But when the kids were finally tucked into bed, and the dishes were set to dry, the quiet returned. Me and Sarah sat together in the small living room, side by side on our sagging couch. A single lamp lit the room, casting a soft glow over the worn carpet and the shelves lined with old family photos. Outside, the Kansas night was full of crickets. Inside, we talked in hushed voices. $72, I repeated for maybe the fourth time, shaking my head. I can't wrap my mind around it. There's no way that machine made the same mistake 3 times. Sarah folded her hands in her lap. And the food we didn't even buy. The baby food jars, the chocolate. David, how can that be explained? I leaned back, exhausted, but my eyes softened when they met hers. Maybe it's luck. Sarah hesitated. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Or maybe it's something more. The words just hung there between us. Then, at 9:15 p.m., something shifted in the room. First, it was the air. A sudden coolness swept through the living room, even though no windows were open. The lamp beside us flickered, and then came the smell, sweet, unmistakable, like roses blooming in the spring. Sarah's breath caught. "Do you smell that?" she asked. Before I could even answer, a light started to shimmer in the corner near the bookshelf. At first it was faint, like moonlight coming through water, but it grew, brighter and softer all at once, filling the room without blinding us. I gripped Sarah's hand. The light shifted, took a shape, and slowly became a figure. A woman stood right in front of us, radiant but gentle, dressed in a flowing white robe with a mantle of sky blue. Her hair was a chestnut color, her face was serene, her eyes were luminous with a tenderness that seemed to go right through us. Her hands were joined in prayer, and her whole being seemed to glow with a peace that warmed the whole room. Sarah's knees gave out. She fell to the carpet, trembling. I dropped down beside her, unable to move or look away. Then the woman spoke, and her voice wasn't really a sound, but more like music that resonated in our hearts more than in our ears. "Do not be afraid, my children. I am Mary, the mother of Jesus, and your mother in faith." Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Tears streamed down her face. Me, usually so steady, I was shaking like a little boy. Mary's gaze swept over us with what I can only describe as infinite compassion. "I have heard your prayers. I have seen your suffering. I was with you when you had nothing to feed your children, and I was with you when the bread appeared on your table tonight. You are not abandoned." Sarah sobbed openly, the words tumbling out. "Was it you at the store, the groceries? The receipt?" Mary smiled with a radiance that filled the whole room. "A mother does not ignore her children when they cry out. What you received was but a sign, proof that heaven sees you, and more is yet to come." I bowed my head, tears falling now. "But why us? We are nobody, just a family in Kansas." Mary's answer was so gentle. It is in the ordinary homes, in the smallest towns, that God's love is revealed most powerfully. You held on to each other when everything else was stripped away. You chose love over pride. That is why heaven has come to you." Her words wrapped around us like a blanket. Then she turned to Sarah. "Your faith and courage as a mother will be rewarded. Your children will grow strong, not only in body, but in compassion. They will understand others' pain because they have known it themselves." Turning to me, she continued, "Your hands, though weary, will build again. Work will be given to you soon, and it will provide not only for your family, but for others as well." For nearly 10 minutes, the room glowed with her presence. We stayed on our knees, hearts pounding, unable to look away. Finally, Mary raised her hands in a blessing. "Remember," she said softly, "you are loved. Share what you have seen. Let your story bring hope. I will always be near." Slowly, the light began to fade. The smell of roses lingered even as the figure seemed to dissolve into the quiet night. When it was gone, silence returned. But it wasn't an empty silence anymore. Me and Sarah stayed on our knees for a long time after, our hands clasped, tears streaming, our souls completely overwhelmed. Neither of us dared to speak, afraid that if we broke the silence with words, this sacred moment might vanish. It was only when Emily crept from her bedroom and whispered, "Mom, Dad, why are you crying?" that Sarah realized hours had passed. She gathered our daughter in her arms, her voice trembling but steady, "Because, sweetheart, tonight we met someone very special, and nothing will ever be the same again." The morning after the apparition, Sarah woke up with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, she hadn't spent the night twisting in worry about bills or food. The scent of roses still lingered faintly in the air, clinging to the curtains and the old carpet. At first, she wondered if it had all been a dream, but when she walked into the kitchen, any doubt she had just shattered. The pantry door, which she remembered closing the night before, was standing slightly open. Inside, shelves that had been half empty were now completely full. Cans of vegetables were lined up neat in rows, boxes of cereal, a bag of flour, packages of chicken that looked sealed fresh from the store. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She called for me, and together we just stared in silence at all that abundance that had been there just hours before. "Sarah," I whispered, "we didn't buy this." She touched the flour, the cans, the bread, like they might disappear if she blinked. "No," she answered softly, "we didn't, but someone else did." That day, when the kids came into the kitchen, their eyes lit up like Christmas had come in August. Emily grabbed an apple, biting into it with tears in her eyes. Jacob shouted, "We have food again!" Little Lily clapped her hands, pointing to the cookies on the counter. And the miracles didn't stop there. On Thursday, I left early to go knock on doors again, but this time something was different. I carried with me the memory of Mary S. words, "Your hands will build again." Instead of dread, I felt a quiet confidence. I stopped at Barbier and Sons, a woodworking company that had turned me down months before. To my shock, the owner greeted me with a smile. "David, you came at the right time," the man said. "I just signed a contract to restore an old farmhouse. I need someone who knows antique work. It starts Monday, 6 months' pay." I could hardly speak. I shook the man's hand with fingers that were trembling, knowing in my heart this was no coincidence. Meanwhile, back at home, Sarah discovered more surprises. She opened the fridge to find jars of baby food she hadn't bought. A box of hot cocoa mix was sitting on the counter, though she'd never put it there. Even the laundry basket seemed touched. Clothes that had been too worn suddenly looked patched, like they'd been repaired with love. Friday afternoon, Emily came home from school carrying a brand new backpack stuffed with supplies. Pencils, notebooks, markers, everything on her back-to-school list. "A lady gave it to me," she explained. She said her name was Mary and that she wanted me to be ready for class. Sarah's breath caught. There was no Mary on the school run that anyone knew of. That same evening, Jacob burst into the house with a huge grin. "Look what I found on my desk." He held up a stack of books, exactly the titles on his summer reading list, and inside the cover of one was a note written in delicate golden ink. "For Jacob, with love, Mary." The most startling moment came from little Lily. At dinner, she looked up from her plate and said in her matter-of-fact 4-year-old way, "Mama, the pretty lady came to my room last night. She told me she loves us. She smelled like flowers." Sarah and I exchanged a look, our hearts pounding. Lily had described the vision perfectly, even though we'd told her nothing about it. By Saturday, our whole family was transformed. The kids played with a new energy, no longer weighed down by hunger. I, once worn down by failure, carried myself taller, ready to work again. Sarah felt a joy she hadn't known in years, though tears still came easy when she thought about all we'd been through. But the miracles weren't just for us. Neighbors began to notice the change. Mrs. Thompson from across the street remarked, "Sarah, you look different, like you're glowing." At church, Father Michael saw our family sitting in the pew with a peace that seemed to radiate out from us. He nodded, like he knew something, but he didn't say a word. That weekend, as we gathered for a simple dinner of chicken, rice and vegetables, Sarah folded her hands and whispered grace out loud. The kids joined in, their voices small but strong. "Thank you, Lord," she prayed, "for reminding us we are never alone." The food, the job, the school supplies, an outsider might dismiss it all as a bunch of coincidences, but for us Millers, every single moment was proof. Proof that what we'd seen in our living room was real. Proof that the mother who had appeared to us was still near, watching, providing, guiding. And deep inside, both me and Sarah knew this was only the beginning. By the time Sunday rolled around, word had quietly started to spread through Willow Creek. People noticed things they couldn't ignore. Our kids, once pale and withdrawn, now showed up at Mass with bright eyes and new school supplies. Me, who'd spent months walking the streets in silence, now carried myself with a renewed strength, talking to neighbors again with a confidence they hadn't seen since before the fire. And Sarah, her face once marked by exhaustion, seemed almost luminous. That Sunday was August 15th, the Feast of the Assumption. St. Joseph's Church was packed with parishioners, the smell of polished wood and candle wax hanging in the air. Father Michael stood at the altar and spoke with a fire I hadn't heard before. "Mary, the mother of Jesus, does not forget families in need. She walks with us in our struggles. She bends low to hear our cries." As he preached, Sarah sat in the pew with our kids, her heart pounding. Every word seemed aimed right at our family. When she glanced sideways, she noticed heads turning. People were watching her, watching us, with a mix of curiosity and something else, wonder. After Mass, the crowd spilled out onto the church lawn, swapping greetings like always. But then something different happened. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher, came up to Sarah. "Honey," she said gently, "I don't know why, but for 3 nights I've dreamed of a beautiful lady dressed in blue. In my dreams, she kept saying, 'Help Sarah's family.' So here." She pressed an envelope into Sarah's hands. Inside was $500 in cash. Sarah nearly dropped it, tears flooding her eyes. Others followed. John Matthews, a retired carpenter, offered me his old set of tools, all polished and ready to go. "I've been keeping these in my garage for years. Don't know why, but I feel like you're meant to have them now." Another woman, Mrs. Carter, leaned in to Sarah. "If you ever need someone to watch the kids while you work, I'll do it. I can't explain it, but I feel like God is nudging me." One by one, townspeople came up, some shy, some bold, all with the same strange urgency. They'd had dreams, feelings, whispers during prayer, all compelling them to reach out to our family. By the time Sarah and I walked our kids home, we were carrying more than just groceries and tools. We were carrying the weight of a whole community that had suddenly been mobilized around us. That afternoon, our home was busier than it had been in years. Neighbors dropped off casseroles and bags of fresh produce. A local farmer offered to supply us with eggs every week. One young couple even left a gift card on our porch without a note. It was like invisible hands were weaving together a net to catch us, and yet the strangest moment still came in private. That night, as Sarah was tucking Lily into bed, our little girl whispered, "Mommy, the pretty lady told me we're safe now." She kissed my forehead. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Lily's eyes sparkled with innocent certainty. Meanwhile, Emily confided in her mom, "I think I saw her too. Yesterday, when I was doing my homework, I smelled roses and I felt, I don't know, like someone was standing right behind me." Jacob, usually the quiet one, surprised everyone at dinner by saying, "I'm not scared anymore. I think she's watching over us." The kids' words spread quickly among relatives, neighbors, and schoolmates. Soon, whispers traveled all over town. "The Millers have seen something holy." Not everyone believed, of course. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, or coincidence, or just desperation coloring how we saw things. But others, especially those who had also felt strange nudges, dreams, or the smell of roses, began to wonder. By midweek, Father Michael's phone started ringing with calls from parishioners. "Father, I had the same dream. Father, I smelled roses in my kitchen last night." "Father, is it possible?" The priest, cautious but moved, advised everyone the same thing. "Pray, stay close to Christ, and if Mary is truly among us, the fruits will reveal it." For us Millers, the fruits were undeniable. Every day brought new provisions, new kindnesses. Sarah didn't have to worry about the next meal anymore. I got ready to start my new job, my toolbox already full. The kids went back to school with everything they needed, their heads held high. And maybe most powerful of all, the town itself began to change. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started offering to help each other. Families that had been strained began showing up at church again. Acts of generosity multiplied like sparks from a single flame. It was like the grace that had entered our house refused to stay put. It spilled out onto Maple Street, then into the pews, then across the whole town. And for the first time in decades, Willow Creek buzzed with a sense of expectation. Something was happening, something that no one could quite explain but no one could deny. It was early Sunday morning, August 16th, when our family was woken up by something extraordinary. At first, Sarah thought it was a dream. The smell of roses was so strong it seemed to be seeping right through the walls. But then I stirred beside her, sniffed the air and whispered, "Do you smell that?" Moments later, the scent spread through every corner of the house, sweet and impossible to ignore. The kids came padding into the living room, their eyes wide. "Mom," Emily whispered, "it's her. She's here again." We gathered in the living room just like we had 3 nights before, and once again the air shifted. The light started soft, almost like dawn coming through the curtains. Then it grew, bright and golden, filling the room with a warmth that soothed every fear in our hearts. And then she was there. Mary stood before us again, radiant in white with her mantle of blue, her face glowing with the same tenderness that had undone us before. But this time she didn't stay distant. She moved closer, her steps as silent as a breath, until she was standing among us like a mother with her children. "My beloved children," she said, her voice like music. "You have endured trial with faith. You have placed love before pride. For this you are blessed." She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. I trembled like electricity was running through me. "David," she said, "your hands will build again, not only for your family but for others. Through your craft, you will restore dignity to those who have lost it. One day you will teach the young and the broken, giving them hope through the work of their hands. Tears blurred my vision. I whispered, I don't deserve this. Mary smiled, her gaze steady. Grace is never deserved. It is given. Then she turned to Sarah, who was already on her knees, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, your courage as a mother has carried your family through the valley of despair. Your faith will become a light for other women. You will gather families in need, help them rise from their suffering, and remind them that no one is ever abandoned by God. You will be a mother not only to your children, but to many. Sarah sobbed openly, shaking her head. How could I do that? I have nothing. You have everything, Mary answered softly. You have love, and love, when offered freely, multiplies. Then bending low, Mary touched the heads of our 3 children. Emily gasped softly, Jacob stared in wonder, and little Lily giggled like she was being tickled by sunlight. Emily, Mary said, your heart for others will lead you to walk beside the hurting. You will grow into a woman who gives strength to the weak. Jacob, you will one day ease the suffering of many through healing hands. The compassion born in hunger will guide your path. And Lily, my little one, your joy will remind all who meet you that God's love is near, even in the darkest hours. The kids stared, wide-eyed, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of her words. Finally, Mary's gaze took us all in. What you have received, do not keep for yourselves. Share it. Tell your story. Let others know that heaven is not far, that God's love is alive. This house will be a testimony and your lives a witness. Many will find hope because of you. Her words wrapped around us like fire and light. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was Lily whispering, "Don't go," her small fingers reaching toward that shining mantle. Mary bent low and kissed our child's forehead. Then she straightened, raising her hands in a blessing. I will always be near. When you doubt, remember the roses. When you despair, remember this night. Slowly, the light began to fade. The glow receded, leaving our ordinary living room once more. But it didn't feel ordinary anymore. The fragrance of roses lingered, clinging to the air long after the vision was gone. We Millers stayed kneeling in silence, our hearts overwhelmed, tears flowing freely. I finally broke the stillness. She gave us a mission. Sarah gripped my hand, her voice trembling but firm. Then we will do it. Whatever it costs, we will do it. And in that moment, our family understood. What had started as just trying to survive was now a calling. We were no longer just a family that had been rescued from hunger. We had become witnesses, chosen to carry a message of hope far beyond Willow Creek. 5 years later, the little house on Maple Street looked nothing like the place it used to be. The siding had been repaired, the yard was trimmed neat, and laughter often spilled from the open windows. What had once been a place of hunger and despair had become a real beacon in Willow Creek, and even further out. I stood in the backyard where my old workshop had burned to the ground. In its place now was a large wooden structure buzzing with activity. It wasn't just my shop anymore, it was a training center. Young men and women, some who had dropped out of high school, others who had struggled with addiction or couldn't find work, gathered every week to learn the craft of woodworking. Under my guidance, they restored antique furniture, built cabinets, even crafted pews for churches in nearby towns. This place gave me my life back, one young trainee told a local reporter. Mr. Miller didn't just teach me how to use a saw, he taught me I still had worth. The center, called the Hands of Hope Workshop, had become a model for vocational training all across the Midwest, and me, once a man brought to his knees by loss, now carried myself with a quiet authority, my reputation as a master craftsman matched only by my role as a mentor. Inside the house, Sarah was just as busy. After the apparitions, she'd vowed to live out the calling Mary had given her. She started small, hosting neighborhood families in our living room, sharing meals, listening to their struggles. But the work grew fast. Donations came in, volunteers stepped up, and soon an official non-profit was born. Hope for Families. What started with a few bags of groceries now served hundreds of families across Kansas every single year. They provided food, counseling, tutoring for kids, support groups for parents having a hard time. Sarah was often invited to conferences, both Catholic and interfaith, to speak about resilience, faith, and the power of community. She always began her talks the same way. 5 years ago, I was a mother with nothing in my cupboards but desperation. Today I am here to tell you that God never abandons his children. Our kids had grown, each walking the path Mary had foretold. Emily, now 17, had chosen to study social work. I want to help families the way people helped us, she told her guidance counselor. She volunteered every summer at her mum's nonprofit, mentoring younger kids who faced the same shame she once hid behind excuses. Jacob, 15, carried books on biology and anatomy everywhere he went. His dream was medicine. I want to be a doctor, he said simply, so no one has to feel helpless when their body is in pain. His compassion, born in those days of hunger, was shaping him into a healer. And little Lily, not so little anymore, was 9, full of energy and joy. Teachers often commented on her radiant kindness, the way she comforted kids who felt left out. More than once, she startled us with childlike but deep words. "Mama, the lady still comes sometimes, not where you can see her, but I can feel her near." The town of Willow Creek itself had changed. St. Joseph's Church overflowed on Sundays. Acts of charity multiplied among neighbors. Strangers passing through sometimes remarked, "There's something different here. People actually care about each other." News of our story had traveled far. Articles appeared in diocesan newspapers, then in national magazines. Documentaries were filmed. Pilgrims started arriving quietly, wanting to see the little house where roses had once filled the air, where heaven had bent down close to touch an ordinary American family. Some came out of curiosity, others in desperation, hoping for healing or guidance. Many left claiming they'd experienced a peace they couldn't explain, and more than a few conversions took place at the humble parish of St. Joseph's. Father Michael, now older and moving slower, had carefully documented everything: the apparitions, the miracles of provision, the transformation of our family and the town. His dossier was submitted to the diocese, where an investigation began. The church moved carefully, but the evidence was compelling: consistent testimony, widespread fruits, lives permanently changed. Standing in our living room one evening, me and Sarah looked around at the photographs lining the walls, smiling students from the workshop, families helped through Hope for Families, our own kids growing tall. "Can you believe," Sarah whispered, "what began with 3 days of hunger has turned into this?" I pulled her close, shaking my head in wonder. We thought we were abandoned, but we were being prepared. And perhaps that was the truest miracle of all, that in a small Kansas town, a family on the edge of collapse had not only been rescued, but transformed into a source of hope for thousands. The story of the Millers, once whispered, was now told in churches, schools, and living rooms across America. It was no longer just about one family's survival. It had become a testimony, living proof that even in the darkest nights, heaven still breaks through. And the fragrance of roses. Well, sometimes on quiet evenings, neighbors swear they still smell it drifting across Maple Street, carried on the wind. And so our journey reminds you of something timeless. that miracles aren't locked away in old stories, but still happen today. In quiet towns, in ordinary homes, and in the lives of folks who dare to keep faith when everything else is lost. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that hope is never far away, and that God's love is always closer than we think.